My wife heard my thoughts for the first time while I was standing at attention in our kitchen, holding a whisk like a surrendered weapon, saying, "Understood, Colonel." What I actually thought was, "Understood, Colonel." Ice Colonel Renata Cole has issued the 0600 pancake directive. If we divorce, I am taking the good skillet. She can keep the protein powder she treats like scripture. I did not know why my wife had frozen mid-step, coffee mug halfway to her mouth, eyes locked on me like I just read a classified briefing aloud in a grocery store. I did not know that Colonel Renata Cole, the woman 3 floors of the base, called ice because she'd never once raised her voice to win an argument. She simply stopped blinking until you surrendered, had, sometime between the alarm and the coffee maker, started hearing every unspoken word inside my skull. So I kept smiling. I kept saying Colonel like a joke that used to be affectionate and had curdled into something closer to a title on a door I wasn't allowed through anymore. And in my head, I kept dividing our furniture. The truth, if she'd asked me plainly, was this: I loved my wife. I missed being her husband instead of her most reliable subordinate. And if the next 30 days went the way the last 300 had, I was calling my brother's divorce attorney and finally doing something about it. She heard that too. That was the morning the Colonel started losing her grip on her own kingdom. Chapter 1: The Pancake Directive. Nobody warns you that marrying a decorated officer means your home eventually reorganizes itself around rank. Renata never meant to run our marriage like a company. She just couldn't turn it off. 15 years of learning that hesitation gets people killed doesn't unlearn itself at 6 a.m. over breakfast. I was in the kitchen at 6:15, barefoot, flipping pancakes and negotiating with our cat, Sergeant Whiskers, a name Renata gave him in a rare moment of humor before humor became a resource she rationed like fuel for a piece of bacon he had no legal claim to. He was 12 years old, overweight, and blind in one eye, which he used strategically for maximum pity. "Back off," I told him. He sat down and looked personally betrayed. "I've read the vet's report. Nowhere does it authorize morning bacon." The bedroom door opened. Sergeant Whiskers abandoned me instantly and trotted toward the sound of boots on hardwood. "Traitor." Renata entered in her PT uniform, hair already pulled into the regulation bun she'd worn every day since I met her, face calibrated to exactly the temperature of a room she hadn't assessed yet. She was 41, 5'9", built like consequences. People who worked under her called her ice not because she was cruel, she wasn't, but because she never melted for anyone in public. At home, she melted for the cat. Barely. Controlled degrees at a time. "You're making pancakes again," she said. Not a question. An observation logged for later review. "Morning to you too." "Yes. Pancakes. It's a food group now, apparently. Your cholesterol panel came back elevated in March. That panel and I have moved past our differences." She didn't smile, but something around her eyes loosened 0.5 millimeter, which from Renata was practically a standing ovation. She poured herself coffee, black, always black, as if flavor were an inefficiency, and I raised the spatula like a salute. "Understood, Colonel." In my head, "Understood, Colonel." Tyrant wife has issued the morning briefing. Property division update: I keep the good skillet. She can keep the oatmeal she eats like it owes her money. Renata went very still. Not paused. Still, the way she used to get right before delivering bad news to families at the hospital, back when that had still been part of her job before the promotion. The coffee mug hovered an inch from her mouth. "What?" I asked, because her face had done something I'd genuinely never seen it do. She didn't answer. She set the mug down with more precision than the moment required. "Nathan." "Yes?" "Did you say something?" "No." "You said something after that." I frowned. "I didn't say anything." Her eyes narrowed the way they did during performance reviews, right before someone learned they weren't getting the promotion they'd been quietly expecting for a year.
You're being strange. I'm making pancakes. This is the least strange I get.
She studied me for 2 more seconds, then picked her coffee back up, and I thought that was the end of it.
It was not the end of it.
It was the first crack in a dam she'd apparently been standing behind, unknowingly, for 6 years.
I want to be clear that I didn't marry Renata for convenience or because someone told me to.
I married her because at 29 I watched a woman argue a hospital administrator into releasing emergency supplies for a training accident without raising her voice once, using nothing but the specific, immovable calm of someone who has already decided she is right and is simply waiting for the room to catch up.
I thought, I want to spend my life next to that.
What nobody tells you is that the quality that makes someone extraordinary at a job can slowly become the operating system of your marriage, until I love you gets replaced with status report, and you don't notice the substitution happening because it happens one Tuesday at a time. We'd been married 6 years. For roughly the last 2, our conversations had migrated from how was your day to did the insurance renewal get filed and your mother called about Thanksgiving, respond by Friday. I wasn't being neglected exactly. I was being managed. Efficiently. Competently. Without malice. Without tenderness either, which turns out to matter more than I'd given it credit for. You skipped dinner again last night, she said, sliding into her seat at the island. I had a protein bar.
The kind that expired in February?
It was sealed. A sealed grave is still a grave.
That, from Renata, was practically flirtation.
I put 2 pancakes on her plate, then set her migraine medication beside it without being asked, because I'd learned the tells years ago. The way her left eye narrowed slightly before a headache announced itself formally.
Thank you, she said. Welcome. In my head, see, tyrant wife, this is what caring looks like.
You might recognize it from the manual you never read, titled Marriage is Not a Deployment. She dropped her fork. It clattered against the plate loud enough that Sergeant Whiskers startled off the counter.
Are you unwell? I asked, genuinely alarmed now. I'm fine.
I hated that sentence. From Renata, I'm fine usually meant she'd slept 4 hours, ignored a migraine, and would white-knuckle through an 11-hour day rather than admit weakness in front of subordinates who idolized her precisely because she never seemed to have any.
You don't look fine. I said I'm fine, Nathan. Full name.
That was new too, she almost never used my full name unless she was building toward something. I braced. Do you ever, she started, then stopped herself the way she did when she was editing a sentence in real time, deciding how much honesty the room could survive.
Do you ever think of me as difficult to live with?
There it was. A live grenade rolled gently across the breakfast table. There were safe answers. No, never, you're wonderful. There were true answers. Yes, when you schedule our anniversary dinner between 2 conference calls and call it protected time. When you say we need to sync on the household budget instead of I miss you. When I ask for 5 minutes of your attention and you give me the exact same tone you give a lieutenant who's late with a report. I think you work hard, I said instead.
Married person diplomacy. That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm giving.
Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might actually push further, might actually ask the real question underneath the question. Instead she looked at the clock, calculated something, and stood. I have an 0730 with General Whitcomb.
I need to go in early. You haven't eaten. I'll eat at the office.
You won't. You'll get pulled into 3 side conversations before you reach your desk, and by 10 you'll be running on caffeine in spite. She stopped at that. Stared at me like I'd described her exact Tuesday from memory, which I had, because I'd watched it happen roughly 200 times.
She sat back down.
8. In silence, But a different kind of silence than usual, the kind where someone is listening very hard to something they can't quite hear. When she stood again to actually leave, I handed her the travel mug, half filled per her own strict caffeine rationing rule, a rule she'd imposed on herself years ago and somehow extended to me by osmosis. Half cup, per your own Ministry of Domestic Beverage Control, I said. Usually she'd roll her eyes at that. This time she just took the mug like it weighed something, said thank you too quietly, and left. The second the door closed, I let Sergeant Whiskers finish the bacon I'd been withholding all morning. Don't tell your mother, I said, and he burped in agreement. Then I did what I'd been doing 3 or 4 nights a week for the past month. I opened the folder on my laptop labeled simply D. Not for divorce, exactly, or not only for divorce. For decide. I'd made it after Renata missed our anniversary dinner entirely because a training cycle emergency came up and she genuinely, sincerely, did not remember what day it was until I mentioned it the following Thursday. Not out of cruelty. Out of the specific kind of forgetting that happens when a person's whole architecture has been rebuilt around mission priority. Inside the folder, a property list, half finished. A note about which attorney my brother had used. A separate document, more painful than either, titled simply Reasons I Am Still Here, which had 4 bullet points and hadn't been updated in 3 weeks. I stared at the property list. First line, Skillet Nathan. Second line, everything else, TBD, ask later, don't be a coward about it. I closed the laptop before I could read further, because I wasn't ready. Not yet. 30 days, I told myself. If nothing changes in 30 days, I make the call. Across town, in a private office on the 4th floor of a building with far too much security for what was ostensibly a training command, my wife sat down at her desk, pressed one hand flat against the surface as if steadying herself against turbulence only she could feel, and did not, for reasons she could not yet explain to anyone, open her first email of the day. She had heard something that morning that she had no framework for. And she had not yet realized it was going to keep happening. I met Renata Cole at a hospital fundraiser I hadn't wanted to attend, wearing a suit I'd rented because my actual one didn't fit anymore after a year of grief-eating following my father's death. I was 31, freshly out of a job I'd hated, drifting in the specific way men drift when they've stopped being sure what they're for. She was giving a speech about a field trauma program she'd designed that had, by conservative estimate, saved 40 additional lives a year across 3 deployments. She delivered it without notes, without a single filler word, and without once looking like she needed the room's approval, which, perversely, made the entire room fall in love with her a little. I did not approach her that night. I'm not built that way. But I ended up seated near her at the dinner afterward, and when the man to her left made an ignorant comment about women in combat medicine, she didn't argue with him. She simply asked him 3 questions in sequence, each building on his own answers, until he'd politely, unknowingly, dismantled his own argument in front of the table. She never raised her voice. She never needed to. I leaned over afterward and said, "That was the most polite murder I've ever witnessed." She looked at me for the first time that night, really looked, and said, "I don't do it to be polite. I do it because losing your temper means losing the argument. People remember who stayed calm." Is that a life philosophy or a hostage negotiation tactic? Ask me again in 10 years, she said, and almost smiled. It took me 2 more months to get her number, mostly because Renata does not do things quickly if doing them slowly produces a better outcome, and love, to her, was simply another outcome to be evaluated on evidence. But once she decided, once the data, as she actually put it to me 8 months later, supported the hypothesis, she committed the way she committed to everything. Total. Immovable. Terrifying in its intensity. We married 18 months after that dinner, in a small ceremony her mother called criminally understated and I called correct. Her best friend and second-in-command, Major Elena Vasquez, stood up as her witness and cried through the entire thing despite insisting beforehand that she absolutely would not. For the first 2 years, it was good. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly good, in the way early marriages are good before life starts asking real questions of them.
We had inside jokes.
We had a Sunday ritual of terrible pancakes and worse jazz records. She called me from conferences just to complain about bad hotel coffee, which, from a woman who rationed her own words like ammunition, was practically a love sonnet. Then she got promoted.
And then promoted again.
And the promotions kept requiring more of her, and she kept giving more of herself, because that was the specific tragic flaw of a woman raised to believe that competence was the only currency worth accumulating. Somewhere in year 4, I noticed the thank yous had started replacing the I love yous. Somewhere in year 5, I noticed I'd started keeping a running tally in my head, not out of bitterness, exactly, more like a man checking a gas gauge, wondering how far the tank could actually take us. I told myself it was a season. I told myself the mission tempo would ease. I told myself a lot of things a person tells themselves when the alternative is admitting the person they married has quietly become someone they mostly see across a kitchen island at 6 a.m., delivering status updates. The morning after the pancake incident, Renata did something she had not done in longer than I could remember. She came home before 8 in the evening. I was in the study when I heard the garage door.
Sergeant Whiskers lifted his head with the specific suspicion of an animal who understood scheduled deviations meant something. I checked the clock twice, assuming I'd misread it.
She came in still in uniform, hair slightly less regulation than usual, like she'd run her hand through it at some point during the day out of frustration rather than habit. "You're home," I said, which felt like an insultingly obvious thing to say but was the only sentence available to me.
"I left early." "You've never left early." "Not once." "I have photographic evidence of you leaving late on our wedding anniversary."
"I know," she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard directed at me in years, not quite vulnerability. Renata didn't do vulnerability the way other people did, but its cousin.
Uncertainty.
She stood in the doorway of the study like she was waiting for clearance to enter her own house.
"Can I ask you something strange?"
she said.
"You've never asked permission to ask me things."
"This is already historic."
"This morning.
When you said Colonel and saluted with the spatula." She paused, recalibrating.
"What were you actually thinking?"
My stomach dropped in a way I couldn't immediately explain.
"Why does that matter?"
"Humor me."
I could have lied.
I'd been lying not maliciously, just by omission, the specific quiet cowardice of not saying the true thing because the true thing might collapse something you're not ready to lose. But something about her face, the genuine confusion in it, made me choose honesty instead. "I was thinking that you'd issued the morning briefing," I said carefully.
"That you run this house like a command. That sometimes I feel less like your husband and more like personnel." She went white.
Not flushed white, the blood actually leaving her face in real time, which I had genuinely never seen happen to her, not once, not during the 2 times I'd watched her deliver bad news to grieving families with total composure.
"Say the exact words," she said.
"Please."
"The exact words you thought." I frowned. "Why would the exact wording matter?" "Nathan."
"Please." So I told her.
Ice Colonel Renata Cole has issued the 0600 Pancake Directive. If we divorce, I am taking the good skillet. She sat down.
Not gracefully, she nearly missed the chair, catching the armrest at the last second, which for a woman who moved through the world with total physical control was its own kind of confession.
"I heard that," she said quietly. "This morning. In my head."
"Your voice, saying that, but I wasn't imagining it. I heard it the way I hear my own thoughts, except it wasn't my thought."
I stared at her. "That's not Renata, that's not possible." "I know it's not possible."
"I have spent 11 hours today trying to convince myself it's not possible, and then Elena said something at 1400 that I know for a fact she never said out loud, and I heard it as clearly as I'm hearing you now."
You think you're reading minds. I think I'm reading your mind, she said.
And apparently, occasionally, other people's, when they're standing close enough.
I don't have an explanation.
I've run every rational hypothesis I can think of.
Sleep deprivation. Stress-induced auditory hallucination.
I had Dr. Okafor run a full panel this afternoon under a fabricated pretext. Everything came back clean. I sat down across from her slowly, the way you sit down across from someone who might be telling the truth even though the truth is insane. Say something, she said.
Anything. In your head. I need to know if it's still happening. I tried to think of something neutral.
Instead, unbidden, the actual thought arrived. If this is real, she's heard 6 years of everything I never said out loud. The frustration.
The loneliness. The 3 separate times I almost called my brother's attorney.
The way I sometimes resent how good she is at her job because it means I come second to a mission I can't compete with.
Renata's face crumpled.
Actually crumpled, the composed architecture of it collapsing in real time.
You've been planning to leave, she whispered. I haven't planned anything. I have a folder.
I have a folder with 4 bullet points in it that I update once every 3 weeks like I'm tracking a slow leak. You have a folder, she repeated, like the word itself was a wound.
Renata, you work 80-hour weeks.
You call our anniversary a protected time slot. I make you pancakes and you thank me like I'm catering staff.
I'm not saying this to hurt you.
I'm saying it because you asked, and because apparently now you can hear it whether I say it or not. So what exactly is the version of honesty available to me here?
She didn't answer immediately.
She sat with her hands folded in her lap in the specific posture she used when receiving devastating field reports, spine straight, face still, absorbing impact without letting it show, because showing it never helped anyone.
Except this time it did show.
A single line of wetness down her cheek, which she didn't wipe away, possibly because she didn't trust her hands not to shake. I didn't know, she said.
I want you to understand that. Not the version of I didn't know people say to excuse themselves.
I mean, I genuinely did not know that competence had replaced tenderness in this house. I thought showing up, providing, protecting, being reliable, I thought that was the tenderness. I thought if I did the job well enough, the love was implied. Love that's only implied stops feeling like love after enough years, I said.
It starts feeling like a job review.
She flinched like I'd hit her, which I hadn't intended, but I also didn't take it back, because it was true and we'd apparently graduated to a version of our marriage where things had to be true now, whether either of us was ready or not. What do you want? She said.
Not a question exactly. More like a data request. I want a wife, not a commanding officer.
I want you to ask how my day was and actually wait for the answer instead of already composing your response to whatever comes next on your calendar.
I want one dinner where your phone stays in the other room.
I stopped, because my voice had started doing something I hadn't authorized. The silence after that lasted long enough that Sergeant Whiskers got bored and left the room. Renata sat very still, and I watched her do something I recognized from every performance review I'd ever seen her conduct, not defending herself, not explaining, just absorbing the assessment fully before responding, because she believed, correctly, that people who defend themselves too quickly are usually still lying to themselves about something. I can't promise I know how to stop being who I've spent 20 years training myself to be, she said finally.
But I can promise I heard you.
Actually heard you, in a way I apparently needed a genuinely insane neurological event to manage.
That's not exactly a romantic declaration. I don't have romantic declarations, Nathan. I have honesty and I have follow-through. Those are the only 2 currencies I've ever trusted.
She looked at me, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, she looked genuinely uncertain of the outcome.
Is that enough to start with? I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know yet. And because, though I didn't say this part out loud,
and for once, mercifully, she didn't seem to hear it. Some small, exhausted part of me was already terrified of how much I wanted it to be enough. The trouble, when it arrived properly, arrived wearing the uniform of Major Elena Vasquez. I want to be fair to Elena before I'm not fair to her. She was, by every operational measure, an excellent officer. Sharp, loyal to a fault, the kind of second-in-command who'd take a bullet for her colonel without blinking. The problem wasn't her competence. The problem was that somewhere in the last 2 years, loyal second-in-command had quietly expanded its job description to include primary emotional confidant, a role that used to belong to me. 3 days after the kitchen confession, Renata came home late again. The mind reading, it turned out, was not a permanent condition. It flickered, unpredictable, strongest when either of us was under stress, silent for days at a stretch, then suddenly vivid again with no warning. That evening it had gone quiet, which meant we were back to old-fashioned methods, conversation, or the absence of it.
Elena needs me to review her promotion packet tonight, Renata said, not quite meeting my eyes. It's due tomorrow morning. You reviewed it Tuesday. There were revisions. Renata. We were supposed to try the new Italian place tonight. You picked the date. You put it in the calendar with a little heart emoji, which, for you, is essentially a wedding vow. She had the decency to look uncomfortable. I know. I'll make it up to you. You always say that. I mean it this time. In my head, before I could stop it, you meant it the last 4 times too. Her face changed, the flicker was back, apparently, at the worst possible moment for her. That's not fair, she said quietly. Isn't it, though? Count them with me. Anniversary dinner, Elena's deployment paperwork. My birthday, Elena's leadership review. The camping trip you promised for 2 years running, Elena's officer evaluation cycle. I'm not saying Elena doesn't deserve a good mentor. I'm asking why her career keeps outranking our marriage on your priority list. She doesn't have anyone else, Renata said, and there was real feeling in it, which somehow made it worse. Her father was career military and impossible to please. She sees me as a mother figure. I know. You've told me. I've met the woman 4 times, Renata, in 6 years of marriage, despite the fact that she apparently occupies more of your calendar than I do. That's an exaggeration. I looked at her. She looked away first, which told me everything the mind reading hadn't needed to. Go review the packet, I said. I'll eat leftovers. Again. She left 40 minutes later, and I sat at the kitchen island with cold pasta and the specific loneliness of being deprioritized by someone you still loved, which is a particular flavor of pain that doesn't announce itself as dramatically as betrayal but corrodes just as thoroughly over time. The next morning, the mind reading came back with a vengeance, and it came back in the worst possible direction, mine. I was making coffee badly, distracted, thinking about the Italian restaurant we hadn't gone to when Renata walked into the kitchen already dressed, and stopped cold in the doorway. You think I'm having an affair, she said. Not a question. Flat horror. I hadn't consciously thought that. But apparently some deeper, uglier part of my brain had assembled the pattern, the late nights, the priority inversion, the specific tenderness in her voice when she talked about Elena's potential and produced the thought before I'd given it permission to exist. I don't think that, I said, too fast. You do. Or some part of you does. I just heard it as clearly as I've heard anything since this started. Her voice cracked slightly, an actual crack, audible. Nathan, there is nothing romantic between Elena and me. I would stake my career on that. You've staked your career on plenty of things that mattered less to me than this marriage. That landed harder than I meant it to. I watched it land, watched something in her actually buckle, not the composed absorption from the study 3 nights earlier, but a real, visible wound. I need you to understand something, she said, and her voice had gone very quiet, very controlled.
the voice she used right before delivering the worst news of someone's life.
Elena is not a threat to us.
What Elena represents, the fact that I have made time, real time, energy, attention, for a subordinate's career while telling myself I had none left for my own husband, that's not evidence of an affair.
It's evidence of something I don't have a good word for yet. But it's not infidelity. I promise you that. Then what is it?
I think, she said slowly, like she was working out a diagnosis in real time, I think it's easier for me to be generous with someone whose need for me has clear boundaries.
Elena needs a mentor 2 hours a week.
You need a wife, every day, in ways I don't always know how to give because nobody ever taught me how, and it's easier to succeed at the small, bounded thing than to fail repeatedly at the large, undefined one. It was, infuriatingly, the most honest thing she'd said to me in years, and it didn't fix anything, but it cracked something open that had been sealed for a long time.
That's not an excuse, I said. I'm not offering it as one. I'm offering it as a confession. There's a difference. I sat with that.
The kitchen was quiet except for the coffee maker sputtering through its last cycle.
I need you to actually change something, I said finally. Not apologize. Not promise. Change.
One real thing, starting today, that shows me you understand the difference between managing a marriage and being in one. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she took out her phone, and I watched her really watched, the way you watch someone perform surgery, cancel the standing weekly mentorship session with Elena.
Not postpone. Cancel. Permanently, replaced with a note, reassigning to quarterly formal review cadence, effective immediately.
That's one thing, she said, setting the phone down like it had cost her something physical.
I don't know how many more I have in me right away. But that's a real one. It wasn't nothing.
It also wasn't everything, and I told her so, and she nodded like a woman accepting a verdict she'd already privately reached. 3 weeks passed. Some nights were better. She came home at 6 twice, which for Renata was a seismic event. She asked, unprompted, how a difficult conversation with my brother had gone, and actually waded through my entire answer without checking her watch. Some nights were the same as they'd always been, old patterns reasserting themselves like water finding its former channel no matter how many times you redirect it. The mind reading came and went erratically the whole time, which turned out to be its own strange gift and curse. It meant we couldn't hide behind politeness the way most struggling couples do, but it also meant every unguarded, ungenerous thought either of us had, the resentments, the doubts, the exhausted 2 a.m. why did I marry someone who doesn't know how to just be present, landed on the other person raw and unfiltered, with no time to soften it first. Elena, for her part, noticed the change immediately, and did not take it gracefully. She showed up at the house on a Sunday uninvited, which she'd never done before, ostensibly to return a book Renata had lent her, but really, it became obvious within 30 seconds, to relitigate the cancelled mentorship sessions. Colonel, I don't understand what changed, Elena said, standing in our living room in civilian clothes that somehow still looked like a uniform.
The quarterly cadence isn't enough. I have the board review coming up. Elena, we discussed this. I have full confidence in your preparation.
You don't need weekly handholding at this stage of your career.
It's not handholding, it's Elena's eyes flicked to me, and something in her expression shifted, calculating. It's fine. I understand. Family comes first now, apparently. The way she said family, with the faint curl of contempt around the edges, told me everything I needed to know about how Elena actually regarded my role in this equation, an obstacle, an inconvenience, the reason her mentor had gone soft. It always should have, Renata said evenly. I owe you an apology for making you believe otherwise.
Elena left shortly after, visibly unhappy, and Renata closed the door behind her with the specific exhaustion of someone who'd just done something difficult and correct.
That wasn't easy, she said. I know.
I keep thinking about how many other Relinas there have been.
How many things I called priorities that were actually just easier than the harder work of loving you properly. I didn't have an answer for that.
I just reached over and took her hand, which she let me do, and for a moment, just a moment, fragile as anything, it felt like we might actually be finding our way back to each other. Then, 4 days later, everything got much, much worse. 4 days after Elena stood in our living room and left with that curled, contemptuous family comes first now, apparently, I got a call at 2:14 in the afternoon from a number I didn't recognize. It was Renata's aide, a young captain named Dobbs who sounded like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Mr. Cole, sorry, Mr. Cole Weston. Colonel Cole asked me to call you. There's been an incident. She's fine, physically. But there's a situation at the board review, and she said you should come to the base." I drove faster than I should have. The story, when I finally pieced it together from 3 different people who each told a slightly different version, went like this: Elena's promotion board review had gone forward that morning. Renata, having stepped back from weekly coaching but still technically Elena's endorsing officer, submitted a formal evaluation, honest, rigorous, the kind she'd have written for any officer, noting genuine strengths alongside 2 specific, documented gaps in strategic-level decision-making that the board needed to weigh. Elena had expected something closer to a rubber stamp. 6 years of being the colonel's favorite had taught her, apparently, that proximity to Renata functioned as its own kind of promotion insurance. When the board, informed by Renata's candid assessment, deferred her promotion pending another rotation, Elena did not take it well. She stormed into Renata's office mid-afternoon, other staff present, door not fully closed, and said, loudly enough that half the floor heard it, that Renata had sabotaged her. That the sudden family first pivot, the cancelled mentorship, the newly critical evaluation, was punishment for something Elena refused to specify but that everyone in earshot understood the shape of. "You used to actually see me," Elena reportedly said. "Now you can't even look at me without flinching, like I did something wrong just by needing you. He got in your head and now I don't exist anymore." He. Meaning me. Renata, by every account, did not raise her voice. She simply said, with the specific stillness that had once made me fall in love with her across a fundraiser dinner table, "Major Vasquez, my husband did not sabotage your board review. Your strategic decision-making did. I wrote an honest evaluation because that is the only kind I know how to write, for you or anyone else, and if part of you believed our relationship entitled you to less honesty than my other officers receive, then I failed you long before today." Elena left the building. She did not clock back in for the rest of the day. When I arrived at the base, Renata was standing in her office, still in uniform, arms crossed, staring out the window with an expression I'd only seen once before, the night I told her about the folder. "I heard she came to the house," she said without turning around. "Sunday. She told me tonight, screaming it at me actually, that she'd tried to warn me you were changing things, turning me against her. I didn't hear it from you. I heard it because apparently whatever this is between us, it's not just you and me anymore." I caught pieces of her thinking too, when she was in the doorway. Just fragments. Enough to understand what she actually believed our relationship was. Which was. Renata turned around. Her eyes were red in a way I'd seen exactly twice in 6 years of marriage, once at her father's funeral, once in our kitchen 3 weeks earlier. She believed I was going to leave you for her. Not romantically, she wasn't imagining an affair. She was imagining a life. My time, my attention, my approval, restructured permanently around her instead of you, with you as an inconvenience she assumed would eventually get tired and go. She'd built an entire future on that assumption. And when I started dismantling it, she experienced it as betrayal, because in her mind, it was never a mentorship. It was a claim. I sat down slowly in the chair across from her desk, the same chair, I realized, where junior officers sat when they were receiving news that would define the rest of their careers. "I let this happen," Renata said. "Not the wanting, I can't control what Elena wanted. But I let the boundaries blur long enough that a grown, brilliant officer genuinely believed she had more claim on my future than my own husband.
That's not on her alone.
That's on 6 years of me choosing the version of intimacy that came with a rank structure attached, because rank structures don't ask you to be vulnerable. They just ask you to be competent, and I have always been better at competent than I have at vulnerable.
What happens to her now? I asked. Professionally. That's not decided today.
Today I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, without me hiding behind procedure or timing or the next crisis. She came around the desk and sat in the chair beside mine instead of behind it, a small thing, but I noticed it, the way you notice a person choosing to sit next to you instead of across from you. I have spent this entire marriage mistaking control for love, she said.
I controlled the calendar because uncertainty terrified me.
I controlled Elena's career because building someone from nothing felt safer than the messier work of being built alongside someone as an equal. I even tried, without fully admitting it to myself, to control you, your patience, specifically, betting that it was infinite, because infinite patience doesn't require me to change anything.
It's not infinite, I said quietly. It ran out about 4 weeks ago. You just happened to be able to hear it when it did. I know.
Her voice broke slightly on the word. And I am more grateful for that, for this insane, unexplainable thing that let me hear the truth instead of the polite version, than I have been for almost anything in my life. Because without it, I think I would have kept managing this marriage competently, right up until the day you actually left, and I would have been genuinely shocked, because on paper, I would have looked like I was doing everything right.
I didn't say anything for a long moment.
Outside her window, the bass ran its evening formation, the sound of boots and cadence carrying faintly through the glass, the sound of a world Renata had built and mastered and, for 6 years, quietly let eclipse the smaller, harder world of us. I don't want a version of you that's just competent at loving me, I finally said.
I had that.
It's not enough, and I don't think it was ever going to be enough, no matter how skilled you got at it. I want the version of you that's willing to be bad at something for a while.
Clumsy. Uncertain. Present anyway.
I don't know how to be bad at things, Renata said, and for the first time in the entire conversation, she almost laughed, a small, wrecked sound.
I've spent my whole life making sure I never had to find out. I know. That's what I'm asking you to learn.
She reached over and took my hand, the same way I'd taken hers 4 days earlier, except this time there was nothing efficient about it, it was uncertain, slightly too tight, the grip of someone doing something without a rehearsed protocol for the first time and longer than she could remember. Then teach me, she said.
Starting tonight. No calendar. No Elena. No mission. Just this. Elena's situation resolved, in the end, without spectacle.
Renata recommended a lateral transfer to a different command, not a punishment, she was careful to make clear to the review board, but a genuine kindness, giving Elena the chance to build her career and her sense of self somewhere that wasn't shadowed by a relationship she'd never been able to see clearly for what it actually was.
Elena took it.
I heard, secondhand, months later, that she was doing well. The mind reading faded gradually over the following months, the way a fever breaks, present, then intermittent, then simply gone, though neither of us ever fully explained it and neither of us particularly wanted to.
Some things, I've come to believe, aren't meant to be explained. Just survived, and learned from, and eventually released.
What didn't fade was the change it forced. Renata started leaving the office at 6 3 nights a week, not perfectly, not without relapse, but genuinely, visibly trying.
She started asking about my day and actually sitting through the answer.
She learned, slowly, clumsily, the way she'd promised, how to be bad at something without immediately optimizing it into competence, because some things, it turns out, are only real if they stay a little imperfect. A year later, on our 7th anniversary, she took her phone, powered it off completely in front of me, and set it in a drawer in another room.
What if there's an emergency? I asked, half joking.
Then the world will have to survive without Colonel Cole for one evening, she said.
It's had to before. I just never let it prove that to me. We didn't go anywhere fancy.
We sat on the back porch with cheap wine and Sergeant Whiskers wedged between us, and she told me, unprompted, about a mistake she'd made that afternoon at work. Not a triumph, not a status report, an actual mistake, something small and human and imperfect. And I realized, listening to her, that this was the sound of a woman finally choosing to be known instead of merely respected. I used to think love was something you earned by being indispensable, she said, watching the light fade over the yard. I'm starting to think it's something you're given, freely, by someone willing to see you when you're not being useful at all.
I don't know how to be loved that way yet. But I want to learn. With you.
If you'll still have me. I looked at her, really looked, the way I had that first night at the fundraiser, before any of this, before either of us knew what the years would ask of us.
I never stopped wanting that, I said. I just needed to know you wanted it too.
If the person you loved most could suddenly hear every quiet, unguarded thought you'd never dared to say out loud, the resentment, the loneliness, the doubts you'd buried under years of politeness, would it destroy what you'd built together, or would it finally be the only thing honest enough to save it? I want to matter as much as the mission, I finished.
Just once. Just to see what that feels like.
If the person you loved most could suddenly hear every quiet, unguarded thought you'd never dared to say out loud, the resentment, the loneliness, the doubts you'd buried under years of politeness, would it destroy what you'd built together, or would it finally be the only thing honest enough to save it?